was the month of October. All of London was aghast at the news of the murder of Sir Danvers Carew. As it transpired, the crime was witnessed by a servant girl. She was watching the drama unfold from her bedroom window till she fainted. And that night the fog came rolling in from the river. The girl said that she could see, walking by the side of the Thames, a kindly faced older gentleman, Sir Danvers, coming from the other direction. A fellow that even from that distance impressed her disagreeably. A gentleman much smaller in stature. His clothing didn't even seem to fit him properly. It hung loosely from his rein. And yet she said, in some awful way that served merely to make him look more terrifying. He was brandishing his cane, this other fellow. It was inevitable that the two of them should cross each other's paths. The girl couldn't hear, of course, what was said. She did say the other fellow, Hyde. He grew more and more irritated. He began pacing up and down, flourishing that walking cane of his. Suddenly, he brought the cane down upon the skull of Sir Danvers, and the old man was knocked to the ground, and yet Hyde rained down blow upon the poor old man's unyielding frame. He seemed to delight in the pain and in the very fact he was committing such acts of violence. The girl said she could even hear the sound of the bones snapping and crunching underfoot, and then when I stamped upon the head of Sir Danvers, out of spite, it was then that the girl fainted. Well, the reason why I was brought in about Sir Danvers' body, his gold pocket watch, and a letter addressed to me. He was, no doubt he had intended to see me the following day. I was called to the morgue to identify my old friend, what was left of him. And then the police showed me the murder weapon, or at least half of it. The cane that had been used as the weapon itself, but dealt with such force it had broken quite in half. But when I saw that walking cane, my blood turned to water. I knew that cane. It belonged to Henry. I had given Henry that same cane some years before. I knew where we would find this Edward Hyde, Blackmail House. I took the police right there. Well, that woman answered the door to us. Looked sly, seemed to be enjoying the drama of the thing. She told us Hyde wasn't dead. Left in a hurry. We barged past her. Went up to Hyde's rooms. They were grand enough, nicely furnished. You could tell, though, he had left in a hurry. Drawers were pulled out, clothes strewn about the place. And the fire, smouldering away, still ashes. I could see the remnants of a green checkbook. It transpired Edward Hyde had some £3,000 to his name in that account. Behind the door, I found the other half of that cane. There was still blood and brains smeared across. I went to see Henry. I asked him had he heard what had happened. He said, aye. He said it was quite all right. None of us would see Edward Hyde again. He said he'd sent him a letter. I said, when was this? He said it been handed in by a messenger. Where was the envelope? I said, oh, he'd already burnt the envelope. I asked if I could read this. It was written in a strange hand, cramped, upright, spidery. Well, in it, Hyde had written what Edward had told Henry he was going away for good. I didn't see where it was going to. Well, Henry impressed upon me I was why I needn't have no more concerns. He was done with Hyde. Hyde was done with him. Well, I hope so. I asked Henry if he'd mind awful if I kept that piece of writing. Why, he said, go ahead. On the way out, I happened to mention to Poole if he caught sight of this messenger, what had brought in the letter. Oh, he said, no, there wasn't any messenger that day. Why was Henry lying to me again? The fog was awful. I mean to say, it was even seeping under the doors. It was like to that wee guy invited my head clerk, Mr Guest, to share a bottle of wine with me. He and I worked with each other for 20 years or more. I trusted his opinion. And Mr Guest also was a student of handwriting. I said to him, imagine, Mr Guest, you haven't ever seen a murderer's signature, have you? I showed him the letter, what Henry had given to me, signed by Hyde. Now then Mr Guest noticed there, perched on my mantelpiece, a dinner invitation that Henry had sent to me. He asked if he might have a look. Already I was afraid of what Guest was about to say. I thought I knew what was coming. Go on then, I said. Well, Guest said it. He could have sworn that these two pieces of writing were done by the wrong hand. I mean to say that there were similarities. Evidently, some effort had been made to disguise the handwriting, but whoever had written the note from Henry Jeckyll also had written the note from Edward Hyde. Dear God! Why was Henry fighting for a murderer now? Of course, a search was made for Edward Hyde. A reward, £1,000 He had any relatives. There wasn't even a photograph of him. No two people could agree on what Hyde looked like. We all simply knew how he frightened us, terrified us. It was almost as though he'd disappeared from the face of the earth, like a misted breath upon a window pane. Well, the month went on. I'm glad to see Henry seemed to revert to some of his old ways. His good work, his philanthropy, started to remind me a little of how he had used to be before this Edward Hyde business had begun. I started to hope. It was true, we had seen the last of Edward Hyde. The shadow that had fallen over my friend Henry was banished forevermore. Now I was forced to be done with Hyde forever. With the murder of Carew, for Hyde to be seen again would have signed his death warrant, and mine, and him, and both. I assured Gabriel that I was done with Hyde. Hyde would leave me alone. I locked up the door to Dr. Denman's old surgery. I ground the key to the door under my foot. It wrote to return to the path of virtue. Any thoughts of wantonness, of wickedness, I kept at bay. I did all I could in my power to perform good works, acts of kindness. I tended to the sick, to the poor, to the needy. My health began to return. I could see the relief upon the faces of my friends, upon Utterson. I suppose I began to grow conceited, complacent, and in my complacence were sown the seeds of my downfall, of Hyde's return. It was a fine day. I was sitting on a bench in Regent's Park, congratulating myself. I happened to glance down at my hand. It was not my hand. It was Hyde's. Edward Hyde had returned. He had returned! Immediately, my mind raised. I felt a contempt of danger. Edward's mind is so fast, his intellect so keen. He knew at once what needed to be done. He gathered his clothes about him. He swung his frame. He had to get away from those who were looking at him. He held a coachman. I told him to take me to Portland Street, an hotel there. He looked down at me, this coachman. He smiled. I stared into his eyes. The smile withered on his face. Just as well, else I would have beaten his brains out. We drove around the city till it was dark, and then to the hotel. I was drawn. The people there in the foyer were terrified of me. I saw them shrink away in revulsion and fear. I went out to a room. I was scared. I did not know what I could do. Hyde's only concern was to avoid imprisonment. If he could have separated the two of us, he would gladly have flown me to the lines. And then I remembered my handwriting could still be the same. I could write as Henry Jeckyll, even though I did not look like him. I sent down writing materials, paper and ink. 2 letters, registered onto pool. Lanyon. Old, reliable, staid. Dr. Lanyon, he would help. He would help Edward Hyde. He would help me for my sakes, for old time's sakes, for the sake of our friendship. Before the night was done, my dear old friend, Hasty Lanyon, would see such dreadful sights. He will witness impossible things. This would hasten his own death. I received a communication from Henry Jeckyll. That struck me as strange. Jeckyll hardly ever used to write to me. It was a registered letter, curious instructions. It said I was to take myself to Jekyll's home. There I would find his man Poole, 2 tradesmen, a carpenter, a locksmith. We would break into old Dr. Denman's surgery, Jekyll's theatre. Then I was to find the 4th drawer from the bottom, the 3rd from the top, the same thing, from a cabinet, to remove the drawer, the contents, bring it back here to my home. Then I was to await a visitor. He would not go into details, but he said I would be doing him a great favor. Life or death is what he said. I journeyed to Jekyll's home. Poole, it transpired, had had a similar letter instructing him to find a locksmith, a carpenter. It was their task to break through the door that had been locked by Jeckyll for some reason. 2 hours later, at last, we were inside the surgical theatre. I found the cabinet easily enough. I packed the contents with straw, covered it all with a white sheet, and then got a hansom back here to my home. I could not help but observe the contents. A curious journal, written in Jekyll's own hand, I believe. Date. Beside them, certain phrases: total failure, double the amount, triple the amount, so on and so forth. A small dish upon which was placed a quantity of salt, various phials, tincture, blood red. Well, I sent the servants to their chambers. I didn't wish anyone else to know of this. I kept my revolver close to me. I had some presentiment of evil. 1 o'clock in the morning, a visitor arrived. Small figure, dwarf-like. The clothing hung from his person, but I did not feel it was at all comical. He was impatient, gnashing his teeth. I reached out to suggest he sit down. The touch of his arm sent an icy pang into my blood. I felt horrified. frightened by his mere presence. He looked toward me and tried to smile. The effect upon his face was damnable. He was more a fiend than a man. He asked if I brought the things and then he prepared a draft. The serum began a blood red, and then it effervesced, hissed, became a deeper shade of purple before lightning, a bright shade of green, a watery green. He said I ought to sit down, that I ought to count my blessings. I was to see what I was about to see. Or made me swear upon my Hippocratic oath not to divulge anything that I was about to witness. I remember he said he was a prodigy of Satan. And then he drank the draught, drained it to the dregs. His hand went to his throat. His features began to blacken. The entire form swelled before my eyes. Grew. Jeckyll was standing before me. It was Henry Jeckyll. The other fellow had gone. He chuckled. Told me that I'd sworn not to tell his soul. Hear what I witnessed that night. Hasten my demise. Dear God, Henry, what have you done, Henry? Dear God, what have you become? What have you become? So I returned here to my home. I slept well. When I awoke the next day, I was crossing the courtyard. I did not even feel the pangs of dissolution. I'd become Hyde again. Hyde had come back of his own volition. The quantity of that soul diminishing, I prepared some more of the serum. I drank. For a while, I was myself. I was Jeckyll, but then, and later that day, Edward returned. He was growing stronger by degrees, and I was growing weaker. He was draining me of my life like a vampire. His lust for life was stronger than mine. His desire to see me vanquished was all-consuming. Once I fell asleep. As myself, I awoke as Hyde. He was becoming too strong for me. Yet the quantities of the salt were running low. If I were to be trapped as Hyde forever, I could not allow that to pass. But he hated me so, as I hated him, but he hated me with an intensity that was equaled by nothing. An intensity born by the very seeds of evil themselves. I couldn't believe I wouldn't see Lanyon again. 10 days later, I was standing there at his grave, his funeral. He suffered a seizure, never fully regained consciousness. He looked a changed man, however, visibly aged, grown bolder. Things rapidly came to a head after that. I remember one Sunday I was walking with my cousin Enfield. It was a lovely bright day, and we happened to turn into the street. There, the courtyard belonging to Henry, and we could see Henry looking out of the window. I called up to him, "Henry!" I introduced Henry to Enfield, and we had a pleasant enough wee little chit-chat there for a while. And then suddenly the look of horror upon Henry's face disappeared from view and slammed the window down shut. I looked at Enfield. We continued on our way. I believe it was later that week. At night, I had an unexpected visitor. Paul, Henry's servant. He was distraught. He said that, please, could I accompany him back to his master's house, back to Henry's. He was fully convinced that something was wrong with the doctor. He feared perhaps that the doctor wasn't even alive still. Well, of course, what more could I do? I had to accompany him.
Well, that night, blowing a gale. You're the night I come round at Mr Utterson's. Gentleman and a scholar, Mr Utterson. That's why I asked him if he would mind coming back with me to Dr Jekyll's home, here. Well, I was worried, you see. I explained to Mr Utterson on the way. Oh, we hadn't seen Dr Jekyll for a week or more. I thought he'd been done away with. The master, I mean. I thought the murderer was inside his surgery. The voices I'd heard, they didn't belong to the doctor. Well, when we got back here, it was blowing a gale. The maids, they was all 6s and 7s. I said to Mr Utterson, we was to go across the courtyard. I was to knock on the door of master. I was to ask him if all was well. I said, on no account, to Mr Utterson, if the doctor invites him inside, is he to go in? Don't go in there, he's a murderer for all I know. He's blown a gale when we got across the courtyard. Up the steps, knock on the door. Is there anything I can get for you, master? Well, voice in there, screamed, nothing, leave him alone. Mr Utterson shook his head. We come back across the courtyard in here. I said to him, Mr Utterson, was that or was that not Dr Jekyll? He had his doubts, he did not think it was what. What Mr Utterson said. He said we was to go over there again. The two of us, and Mansfield the footman, we was to go armed, an axe and a poker or what have you. Oh, he didn't know what was in there. Well, I was firmly convinced the master was dead. Well, I mean to say, I've seen him once. No, not the master, Mr Hyde. I went over there. I went over the surgery. The door was open, his back was to me, but I saw him rummaging about the crates and the straw. If that was my master, why is he wearing a mask? Because he spun around, he looked like an ape. He leapt up there like a monkey, or set my hair on end in it like quills. And the voices, they were like animal screams, calling out at all hours. Every day he's been leaving messages written down. I'm to go all over town looking for this particular salt. Who sent me to all of the chemist firms. Oh, one of them threw me out. Lost his temper. I keep going back to the master and I can't find it. He just tells me to go back and find more. This particular salt he wants and the quantity of it. It's my belief, and I said to Mr Addison, it's my belief, whatever's in there is done away with the doctor. For all I know, he's buried under flagstones. Well, that night, blowing a gale, Mansfield, the footman, he was round the front of the house just in case whatever's in there escapes. Mr Utterson, he says, I was not to panic. He was to go in first. I was to be prepared for anything, what we might see inside there. Mr Utterson, he knocks on the door. Calls out, he does. Is that you, Henry? Voice inside screams out. Mr Utterson said, that is not my friend. Break the door down. Well, it was a sturdy door. Took us a few while to get inside. Knocked the thing off of its hinges. I don't mind telling you, I was scared. Mr Utterson, he warned me to be quiet, and he went into that room first. I followed. But I'll tell you, I did not, for the life of me, know what we was going to find. Whether my master, the doctor, was living or dead.
Really on, I wasn't sure what to expect when we burst into that old dissecting theatre. Everything looks so normal. I mean, the fire was aglow, the tea things were laid out ready. Henry! There were things wrong. A portrait of Henry's father, defaced, blasphemous, scrawled across it in Henry's own handwriting. And then I saw there flung onto the floor their old family Bible. Obscenities written inside, pages torn out. Blasphemous things. Again, Henry had written this. Henry's mind gave way. There were so many places in there where a murderer could have concealed himself. Paul took to stamping upon the floorboards. Good God, could Henry be lying under there, dead? I turned the corner, and then I found Mr Hyde, at least, dead. He had taken his own life, crushed file in his hands. Even from where I stood, I could smell the bitter almonds. He had lived like a coward and died like a coward. I still didn't explain where my friend was. Paul called me over. There was a note written by Henry, left for me to find. Said to me I wouldn't ever see him again. He had gone for good. It was more than I could fathom. I told Paul we'd have to get the police in, not to touch a single thing, to leave Hyde there. Leave everything the way it was, till the police should be here, and then we would come back. And then I prayed, perhaps they might be able to unravel this mystery as to where my good dear friend Henry Jeckyll had gone to. Utterson and Poole were doomed to disappointment. By the time they returned with their police, not a body was to be found. Edward Hyde was gone. You understand an impurity in the original batch of salt led to the potency of my serum being such a resounding success. Poor Henry knew this, was afraid that I would be trapped here in the land of the living forevermore, like the coward that he was. Henry Jeckyll took his own life. Yet, the moment Jekyll's heart stopped, the heart of Edward Hyde began. It is what Utterson saw. They were not my death throes, rather my pangs of birth. Now I am taller, stronger, broader. My lust for life is such. The puny frame of Henry Jeckyll was not sufficient to contain me. I am at liberty, alive, untrammeled from the bars of the prison, erected by Henry Jekyll's cowardice, his morality. I am giddy, giddy with the thought of all that I may now be able to accomplish, but a degree of circumspection. I will take myself away from this side of the city to another, just for jolly. The East End Spitalfield. I've heard such delightful things. Whitechapel deserves to be introduced to Edward Hyde. I mean, time for me to take my little games there, to show them who is boss. What is the worst that could possibly happen? Besides, the chain